Hello again. I'm Victor Zhao, the president of the U.S. National Academy of Medicine, and welcome back, or thanks for joining us as you just came on. This next session, to me, is a highlight of the meeting. It's called Exploring the Landscape of Innovation, Health and Longevity. You know, you're in for a real treat because it's a unique opportunity to hear from the movers and shakers, the leadership of the top 8 organizations, funding agencies, researchers in the space, and they're going to be in conversation with one another. Before I jump in, I want to give you some background and some context. Back in 2016, the National Academy of Medicine chose health longevity as the topic of its first ever grand challenge. Our members, top experts in the field, overwhelmingly recognize this as an area in need of focus, attention, and leadership, and also area ripe for innovation and impact. At this very early time, aging research, especially health and longevity innovation, received limited interest from the scientific community. There certainly was a lack of critical mass investigators, the scope was somewhat limited, and the funding was low, and there was insufficient commercial opportunity. After a period of extensive planning, we built partnership and raised money. We, the NAM, decided to take a bold step and launch the Health and Longevity Global Grand Challenge in 2019. Now, through this Grand Challenge and the competition that you all are part of, we provided seed dollars to support bold and innovative ideas. And we attracted and supported a very promising pool of bold new research projects across many disciplines, especially young investigators. We're able to attract public-private sponsors, including foundations, industry, government, and importantly, we have participation from more than a dozen countries, from US to EU, which of course have many countries, Japan, China, UK, Chile, Singapore, and many others. And the award is available to research in over 50 countries and territories. You know, the popularity of this Catalyst Award is evidenced by the average of 1,200 to 1,500 submissions each year from applicants around the world. By now, including this year, we have funded over 650 awards, totaling about $35 million. We believe the awards have played an important role in stimulating and moving this broad and diverse field forward. So as a pioneer, I'm so pleased to witness the field has woken up in the last few years, attracted interest from many sectors. And you hear some of the leaders today. We've seen a huge influx of dollars, research funders, venture capital firms, and other initiatives dedicated to supporting and incentivizing innovative research, health and longevity, Healthspan science, geoscience, and related fields. Well, guess what? Today's participants are exemplars and leaders of this dynamic field. They're the ones who have injected so much more energy, thoughts, and resources into this field. And I'm so glad to welcome them. They're leaders from the U.S. National Institute of Aging, AFAR, the Association for Aging Research, Altos Lab, you hear more about the exciting work, the Hevolution Foundation, and also the XPRIZE. So personally, I'm very excited to see such a big increase in resources now becoming available and incentivizing the best and the brightest research entrepreneurs to enter and continue work in this field. I feel that we have done our job, and the new opportunities activities happening now have added greatly to momentum, taking the field to a whole new level. I'm very much looking forward to continue to track all those amazing opportunities available and the breakthroughs that lie ahead. Thanks to this group of innovators and leaders, and to many of you and others who have supported this field. So with that, I want to turn over to Tom Rando, my good friend, president of the board of American Federation of Aging, and he will moderate the session, introduce the speakers. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Victor. And again, thank you for inviting me and us to participate in this terrific panel and this terrific meeting. So my role here is to moderate, and as Victor mentioned, I am the president of the board of the American Federation for Aging Research. I also direct the Broad Stem Cell Research Center at UCLA, but for much of my career, I've really been a researcher in the biology of aging and stem cell aging and interventions to increase and improve kind of healthy regeneration in the elderly. And just to say a word about AFAR, the American Federation for Aging Research, our mission is to support and advance healthy aging through biomedical research. And our main focus really is research in the basic biology of aging and translational research to promote Healthspan. But I want to welcome our audience, most of whom are Healthy Longevity Catalyst awardees from around the world, from academia, from startups, from biotechnology, from pharmaceutical companies, and of course, any other interested parties who might be joining us today. And just a brief preview of the session. The session will feature a panel of leaders representing major funders and research organizations in this field of healthy longevity. It'll highlight recent successes, ongoing challenges, and trends in the field. We'll get into that. We'll identify funding opportunities and explore future directions in this very dynamic area of science. The National Academy of Medicine chose this group of panelists to showcase major funders and research organizations in the field, as well as some of the most innovative, cutting-edge, and groundbreaking work happening in the field. We're fortunate to have 4 experts from different corners of longevity space. I know all 4 panelists, and I've had the honor and pleasure of working with 3 of them, actually, 2 currently. Still waiting for a chance to work with one of them. I'll mention that. We wouldn't be lucky than to have these really terrific leaders in the field with us today. So the general structure is this. I will introduce each panelist individually before their remarks, and they'll deliver some brief comments in sequence. I'll then moderate a discussion among the panel. And during the final segment, we will open up to Q&A from the audience, and there'll be instructions on how to solicit your questions so viewers on live stream can submit written questions. Okay, so let's get going. Again, I'll introduce the panelists by one title, but I'll leave it to them to tell you more about themselves and more about what they represent. So to begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Hodes, Director of the National Institute on Aging at the National Institutes of Health in the US. I've known Richard for most of my career. I had the pleasure of working directly with him for several years as a member of the National Advisory Council on Aging at the NIA. So Richard, please share some thoughts on yourself and some comments on general funding environment in the aging and longevity space.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for an opportunity to participate in this magnificent panel. The National Institute on Aging overall supports healthy aging and longevity through all of its institutes, but the National Institute on Aging takes the lead in this area focused on aging. Aging research, ranging from the most molecular, cellular, and genetic, through clinical, behavioral, social, and societal aspects. Much of the research supported by investigator-initiated applications. Some of it responds to targeted and advertised set-asides of resources. If there's one message that I'd like to make sure to get across is that we are receptive to all of the innovative and exciting additions to research enterprise that you can generate, and ask you to get in touch with any one of us. If you have no other name to go to, you can use my name at nih.gov. We'll all get you to the right place. In addition to the research carried out, it's important that our mission include the generation of new investigators in the field. That's both training and career development at every point. The grants range from full-fledged research enterprise, large centers, to exploratory opportunities, very much like the challenge that we see here. In addition, we provide infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and its importance, I think, to all of us, to all of you. And in addition, our mission includes the obligation to communicate to the public the fruits of the research that we do. If I reflect just briefly on some of the trends in research that I think are important to all of us, they include prominently in the years since 2016, as Victor was outlining, some remarkable changes in a couple of areas. One of them has to do with data and data sharing. The amount of data that we generate is enormous. Our ability to calculate and focus upon the data enormously expanded. But an important aspect of that is by NIH requirements, and I think a remarkable movement and momentum in the society of research. These are open data, and to emphasize this fact, some of our largest, most comprehensive data sets, be they population data sets, longitudinal studies, molecular, multiomics, are open and fully available to the research community, so that we take pride when some of these initiatives actually are used and published upon by a majority of investigators who aren't even those who generated the data. So to all of you, look at ways to focus your own research careers and enterprises. Pay attention to the huge resource that you have available that can be used to leverage research. Towards the entrepreneurial aspects in particular, we have an amount of our budget that is dedicated to what is called small business initiatives. This is money that is targeted for entrepreneurial efforts, and we have training and career development and entrepreneurial issues as well, in addition to the very pervasive academic focus. So, Tom, I think I'll stop there. I know we're going to have time to expand upon this in discussion. I look forward to being a part of it.
Great. Thanks so much, Richard. That was a great overview. Our next panelist is Dr. Jamie Justice, Executive Director of XPRIZE Healthspan and Vice President of the Health Domain XPRIZE Foundation. I was honored to be invited by Jamie to serve on the Endpoints Committee for XPRIZE Healthspan, and we've been working very closely over the past year, and it's been a really exciting initiative. So, Jamie, please tell us about yourself and about XPRIZE.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's always nice to see you on a little square box in the mornings. Marks a good day. And again, this panel, I could not be more thrilled to join. So again, I'm Jamie Justice, and I am the Executive Director for XPRIZE Healthspan, and also the Executive Vice President for Health at XPRIZE Foundation. I also still do hold an adjunct appointment, at least, at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. And in my roles, the fundamental driving question of my work from the time I was a PhD postdoc to where I am now has been, if an intervention could target aging or improve health span, how would we even know? And so this work was formative from studying anything from animal models into early stage and even large scale clinical trials, where I had the opportunity. All of my work was funded as an academic, either through NIA, or through the American Federation for Aging Research. And, again, it included things of early stage trials with Senolytics, large scale endeavors of looking at an aging outcomes trial with metformin. And all of that work was really informative, but what it informed more than anything are the major barriers as well as the major progress that we've made as a field in trying to address this question. So just over a year ago, I had the opportunity to take a sidestep from some of my work, maintaining my focus. And now I have the chance to work with Mehmood, who we'll hear from later, and also Tom and many others, to lead something called the XPRIZE Healthspan. So first for XPRIZE, because when I first received the call, I'd never heard of XPRIZE Foundation, but it's been around for a long time and has made major impact. So it's a global leader in designing and executing large-scale competitions to solve humanity's greatest challenges. And so this is a very unique model. It's a nonprofit foundation, and it uses innovation and incentivizes crowdsourced scientifically viable solutions. And so this means really large-scale competitions. So since 1994, XPRIZE has launched $519 million worth of prize purse, and they've awarded out of those $146 million. That gap is because we currently have 3 more than $100 million prizes currently in the field, anything from carbon removal, water desalination, to the prize that I lead, which is the $101 million XPRIZE Healthspan, that is actually funded with support from many different individuals, but with our co-title sponsors, Hevolution Foundation, and also Chip Wilson and Solve FSHD as another co-title sponsor. And so just a brief word about the prize, and again, we can go into this more detail, but certainly as this group knows, and really is the theme of this meeting, increasing human life expectancy, it's been one of the greatest breakthroughs in modern history. So we've already more than doubled our global average life expectancy in the last 100 years, but the length of our healthy lives within those years has not necessarily increased at the same rate. And so we have a real urgent need to find new solutions to help close that gap. And so the premise of geroscience is that if we target the biology of aging with either a single or combination of therapeutics, is that it may be possible to restore function that's lost due to age-related degradation, not of a single organ system, but multiple. And so that's where the prize steps in, is that this is an initiative. It's a 7-year global competition that we're asking teams to come in and participate, again, develop their therapeutics, test these in up to 1-year clinical trials in persons who are older but free of life-threatening disease and disability. And that we have set out metrics that this team has to demonstrate their therapeutic works by improving muscle, cognitive, and immune function within 1 year. And so it's been a great mission. But I mean, again, what brought me into this was not the opportunity to award money, but it's actually to create a global network, is that we put these large prizes together. It's an alternative funding model to try to raise funds, incentivize people to get into a field, drive investments, create a global network to actually begin to answer some of these driving questions, and also develop new methods and resources for folks that are just starting out or who maybe have been in the field for a while and tried to inject a little positive direction. So again, it's been a real thrill and honor to be able to lead this, and I'm really excited for the progress that we've made so far. And if anyone's wondering if it's been successful so far, is that I've certainly grown and learned a lot. We've established a really great group of 20 different advisors. My endpoints committee, who Tom has been my right hand all year. But the results are in the teams as we're still open for registration. So far, right now, with still, I think, 3 months left on the clock, we have 440 teams as of this weekend from 53 countries across 6 continents. And so this is a space that people are watching carefully and closely. And it's a place that's very exciting to see the number and types of developments that are happening and the range of different investigators who are interested. So again, a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Jamie. I can't imagine a better aligned organization for our audience, these Catalyst awardees. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions from them about XPRIZE. Thank you so much. So our next panelist is Dr. Mehmood Khan, MD, Chief Executive Officer of Hevolution Foundation, which is based in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I've had the privilege of getting to know Mehmood and to work with him as a member of the Scientific Advisory Council of Hevolution, and actually former CEO of my company is also directing the strategy for investment for Hevolution. So I'm sort of an unofficial consultant on that side as well. And again, this is a very global initiative. We'll look forward to hearing. Mehmood, please share with us more about this and how Hevolution is moving the needle in the longevity space.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jamie. So I'm the least qualified of these panelists to talk about the science of aging. So let me just set the record straight. My primary job is to find the best partners I can and hire the best people I can and figure out a way to how to get them to work together. And I think if I was to use that criteria, I couldn't be happier. We were launched 4 years ago with a vision and mission simply stated as to extend healthy lifespan for the benefit of all. When we started, there was a lot of discussion around longevity, and we wanted to make sure that what we were not interested in was extended life for the sake of extending life. We wanted to extend healthy life. Whether it had an impact on longevity or not would be a secondary goal. And that is how we have focused. Our focus is on the biology of aging itself rather than specific diseases related to aging, recognizing that aging is not a regulatory path to market at this point, and many therapeutics may well use surrogate diseases, but ultimately what our focus is, the underlying diseases, the underlying biology that we do. Of course, we're focused on peer-reviewed, high-quality science, and just looking at the quality of submissions that we've been receiving, it's been amazing to me. Our approach is primarily through 2 verticals. One is to fund the science itself. We are a nonprofit. 100% of the research that we fund comes with no strings attached. We don't ask for IP. We don't ask for royalties. In that way, we're somewhat very similar to the NIA. And I must say we're inspired and have taken the learnings from the NIA and from AFAR in terms of how we do it. We operate through partners. And in fact, AFAR is a very important strategic partner, just like the XPRIZE is. And if we could not have launched our major initiative in the US without the partnership of the American Federation of Aging Research. So I want to acknowledge and thank for the ongoing work that is being done. And I think this speaks to not only our operating model, but one of the things I've learned in my career is if you want impact, you need scale. And if you're going to get scale, you're going to create leverage. And the only way to do that is through collaboration. So if you do not know how to collaborate, you're never going to get the scale you need. And if you cannot get the scale, you're not going to have the impact, and you'll remain small mom and pop shop that you started with. And so really the question is, how do we get all of the different entities working together? If I think about the challenge of this field, it's going to be how to increase collaboration to get the scale that this field needs. If you compare that to cancer and many other diseases like metabolic disease, being an endocrinologist, they all went through the phases that the aging field has gone, and really credit to the NIA for being the pioneers in moving this field, really being the believers, moving it along so that the rest of us can come along and leverage that. And Felipe Sierra from the NIA and Viviana Perez, both are members of our team at Hevolution. And just to give you a few numbers, since we launched, we now, in the last 20 months or so, have allocated over $400 million to research funding across the world. So it makes us one of the biggest funders of aging biology and neuroscience in the world, and continuing to grow. I expect that number to significantly continue to grow. And probably the biggest limitation in this is for our ability to process and scale across different continents. We do not have the equivalent with the American Federation of Aging Research in the United Kingdom, European Union, and other parts of the world, which we can leverage in the same way that we have been able to leverage AFAR. But we are in discussions with similar like-minded organizations. Today, we're funding over 170 individual investigators and laboratories around the world. We have funded partnerships, multi-year partnerships with institutions like the Buck Institute, Northwestern, Albert Einstein, and many more that already are done but not yet announced. And as well as launching endowed chairs in the field. So we're coming at this, trying to move this field through a number of well-tested levers, including, of course, being the single largest funder of the XPRIZE itself. So how do we look to this to the future? And what are, one of the questions that was asked, what's the biggest challenge in this field? I think the biggest challenge has been the absence of the ability to measure aging consistently across tissues, across organs, and across people and populations. The second is the lack of international collaboration between countries and different parts of the world. If I look at this as the newcomer to the field, great work done by the NIA, but not really a lot more outside, and not a lot of collaboration between countries, even those with developed scientific ecosystems, and often not even collaboration between institutions. So how do we bring that about to do that? And I think that's going to be critical. The second is the excellent comment that Richard made, which is we are at the era of very large data sets, and open sourcing that data set, in particular for things like biomarkers and measurement technologies, is going to be key. No one data set alone can do this. So how do we think about cohorts? We've done a lot of cohort work in the past as cross-sectional, with a few exceptions, such as the Baltimore study. Again, credit to the NIA. There have not been any significant multinational cohort studies that have looked across populations over time. And so there are some gaps. A comment for this audience in terms of entrepreneur potential and the future. The good news is, even though we keep hearing there's not a lot of capital, it's tough to get funding, all of that is true. I can tell you there's far more capital available than there are good ideas. And so the question really is how to sift through those good ideas and identify them, package them in a way that investors can understand, and not only show the evidence of the science, but the scalability and the application in the marketplace are very, very important if you're going to transition them from the academic environment, which often is the case, into the private sector, which is ultimately responsible for scaling most of the technologies we're talking about. So let me stop there. I look forward to the discussion. So thank you, Tom, Richard, and Jamie, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Mehmood. And, let me second, of course, the impact Hevolution has had on AFAR as a partner with AFAR. It really has globalized us in many ways and just infused this energy and excitement into the field. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll come back to that. So our final panelist is Dr. Hal Barron, founder, CEO, and board co-chair of Altos Laboratories, with major centers in the US, the UK, and Japan. I got to know Hal when he was at Calico back in the day, And Hal is the one person who I've not had a chance to work with, but I feel it's inevitable, Hal. At some point, our paths keep bumping into each other. But I've been following his career and what has brought him to Altos Lab. And I think it's been a really exciting time. So Hal, please tell us more about yourself and Altos Laboratories.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be on the panel. So as Tom said, I'm the CEO, founder, and co-chairman of Altos, a very unique company that I'll talk about in a second. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my background because I think it helps put in perspective why I think Altos is so important. I was at UCSF. I was an academic cardiologist for a little over a decade and left academia to go to Genentech, where I spent 14 years as the chief medical officer. And then when Roche bought Genentech, I became the chief medical officer and head of product development for Roche. I left Roche to form Calico with my mentor, colleague, friend, Art Levinson, one of the first large sort of companies focused on aging. After about a little over 4 years there, went to run R&D at GSK, a big pharmaceutical company. And then after about 5 years, left to found Altos. And I say all this because I've seen some of the amazing things that happen in academia, some of the amazing things that happen in pharma, some of the amazing things that happen in biotech. I've been exposed to now 2 companies in aging. And when we put Altos together, we tried to make it a very unique company. So it is for profit. There are many unique and inspiring things, in my opinion, about Altos. First is our mission. Our mission is to restore cell health and resilience, if you want to think about, through cellular rejuvenation, cellular reprogramming, to reverse disease and the injuries and the disabilities that occur throughout life. And this is important because, as Mehmood said, we're not interested in longevity per se, it's in health span. And we think one way to do that would be able to actually reverse disease. And I'll say in a few minutes a little bit about why we think that's possible. So very unique mission. Most companies really think about how to treat the pathophysiology of a disease. We're trying to understand why animals, organs, and even cells remain healthy when they're young. They can withstand the stresses that occur, but they lose that buffer capacity over life. And we think that by focusing on how to increase the buffer of the cell, the organism, one might be able to reverse disease. The second thing that's really interesting about and unique about the company is we're predominantly academic. About 80% of the company are academic scientists. I think it was the largest exodus from academia to industry maybe ever. We have 3 sites in the Bay Area, San Diego, and as was mentioned, in the UK. We have some incredible luminaries in the field of aging and other areas of science, including Juan Carlos Belmonte, who was the founding scientist and is in the Institute of Science in San Diego. Wolf Reich, who ran the Babraham, is in the UK. Jody Nunari, world-renowned scientist in metabolism and mitochondrial biology in the Bay Area. We have a number of other amazing scientists. Peter Walter, Rick Klausner is our chief scientist. The list goes on. Even our board is heavily science-focused as well, with David Baltimore, Maria Lepton, Jennifer Doudna, and advising us is Shinya Yamanaka. So a really very, very strong focus on science. And maybe the most unique is our funding model. So we have been very, very generously given $3 billion to invest in this company, giving each of the academics a tremendous amount of freedom and an ability to take the long view, which is oftentimes missing in academia, to work on really big projects that they think can be transformational to achieve our mission, which is quite bold. And so the model the venture capitalists are assessing is whether giving $3 billion to one company versus, say, 30 million to 100 would be a better return for them. And we hope to show them that it is. As I said, we have 3 sites with 26 PIs, around somewhere between 6 and 10 scientists per lab. We also have a very big support group that provides everything from things like mass spec and sequencing, imaging, et cetera, to support the scientists. We also have an Institute of Medicine for all the science that emerges out of the Institute of Sciences, where we think that they can be translated. So a growing group that works on this aspect of the translation. And then a newly formed Institute of Computation, which we can talk about later if there's questions, but really trying to leverage some of the amazing advances that have been made in machine learning, AI, generative AI, to be able to really unravel what we consider, like I said, one of the most important problems is what is this buffer that exists in young cells that seems to be absent. So just quickly about the science. So I mentioned our mission is to reverse disease by restoring cell health. The seminal work that led to the founding of the company was, as many of you might remember, Shinya Yamanaka identified the 4 so-called Yamanaka factors that actually were able to take an old cell and rejuvenate it completely, and in fact, even turn it into an induced pluripotent stem cell that could even create a whole new mouse if you used a mouse cell. This amazing feat led to a lot of change in science and a Nobel, excuse me, a Nobel Prize. And work by Maria Abad and Manuel Serrano, who are both also PIs at Altos in the UK office, decided to study this by giving it in vivo. Could this be translated? And although they saw a lot of rejuvenation in tissues, they saw teratomas. And this was a big setback for the idea of using 4 factors, these Yamanaka factors, to rejuvenate. Juan Carlos Belmonte, as I said, our founding scientist, did what was now, I think, seen as one of the most important advances in the field, and that is that he was able to identify a regimen that dissociated the rejuvenation of the cell from the dedifferentiation and induction of pluripotency by using something called partial reprogramming. And this was really a way of reducing the epigenetic age, improving the cell function, really restoring buffer to these cells and to the organs and to the organism with the demonstration of a survival advantage in a progeria model. And this led really to the belief that maybe for the first time one could imagine cellular reprogramming being used as a way of improving function in mice and hopefully in humans. And so that led, as I said, to the formation of the company. And with the long view, our goal is to really understand this phenomenology, this fact that with 4 proteins, 4 transcription factors, one can rejuvenate a cell. How does that happen? Why does that happen? Are there ways of targeting that? And could one use those to develop therapeutics that, as I said, could reverse disease? I'll just stop there and we can see if there's questions on that science or the approach later. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Hal. Again, thank you for introducing Altos Labs and the exciting work going on there. So I was asked to kind of summarize the presentations, and I wouldn't presume to say anything better than the panelists did, but there were some themes I'll just point out. So one of the themes that I hear among all the panelists is kind of global nature of the field and how this has really expanded from individual to really looking at individual countries to looking at this globally. Also this idea of collaboration and this idea of working across institutions, across countries, across laboratories as being absolutely key to the success of all of these organizations. Another is, again, a common theme right now is the focus on Healthspan, the idea that we're not looking to have people live forever or live even decades longer, but to have long, healthy lives. And I think that's really permeated the field, and it's certainly true from all the institutes and organizations presented here. And then finally, the issue that I hear over and over is, the issue of scale that Mehmood mentioned and impact. How do we take the work that's been done in the laboratories and in academia and really translate that into something that will help benefit people around the world? And we can maybe talk about something related to accessibility and affordability if that comes up in the discussion. So I'm going to kind of lead a discussion now. I've come up with a couple of questions that I thought might be of particular interest to our attendees, and I'll pose this to our panelists. I'll initially ask individually, but I'll love to have interactions among the panelists. So please feel free to chime in, interrupt, raise your hand, whatever, as we have this discussion ongoing, and then we'll turn to the audience for some Q&A. So I thought one question, I was thinking about this last night, that might be of interest to the group, and I'm going to put this to each panelist, is in your organization or institute or company, are there misconceptions that you would like to dispel that you keep answering over and over? No, we don't do this. What we do is that, or that kind of thing where people get an idea that you're doing X, but in fact, you're actually doing something else. So I want to give you this opportunity to share that with this group who are going to be very interested in what you do. Or if not that, then a myth in the field that you'd like to bust. That, again, you find yourself over and over saying the same thing So Hal, let me start with you, just because you've hired a lot of people from very different areas, and I'm sure people are always coming to you to ask about what Altos is, what Altos does. What myth or misconception would you like to dispel that that you find yourself answering over and over again?
Such a good question. Hoping to go last so I'd have more time to think. I think one myth that I experienced when I was at Calico as well, which is people feel like in the for-profit sector, the private sector, that people interpret what you're doing as secretive. We publish everything very quickly. I'm amazed in the quality of the journals. You put a little Altos search in your PubMed every week, you'll see things that were worked on in the last 6 to 12 months, and in very impressive journals. If you want to know what we're doing, it's completely related to the publications, obviously. And that's part of the model we have, is to give the scientists and the PIs freedom to pursue whatever they think is most important and most likely to advance our mission. That was true at Calico, but I think there's a perception that if you're for profit, you're going to be secretive, which I guess I understand where that comes from, but it's not true. It's very clearly we do file intellectual property, but that doesn't almost ever delay the publication.
Great, thank you. It's a key point. I think you're right, that there's a sense that the wall is around the company, and no one knows what goes in or comes out. So I think that's great for the attendees to hear. Mehmood, in terms of Hevolution, obviously you're funding a wide variety of things. Do you find yourself saying, we don't do this? If people come to, do you draw some lines? Are there misconceptions about Hevolution?
I think there are misconceptions that are about the field that connect to Hevolution, and there are several. The one that comes to mind is there's a lot of myths in this field, and from you go into a chamber and you'll come out younger, to if I go and buy some plasma from a young person, infuse it into myself, suddenly I will become rejuvenated. And those things are going on in different parts of the world, in different parts of the US, and sifting out all that noise from credible science is probably one of the most labor-intensive things our review process and teams are doing. Because ultimately we're looking for credible evidence-based science, which is reproducible and scalable. And there may be ideas that might be reproducible, they're not scalable, either because of ethics or cost or what have you. And there are some that are never reproducible. And unfortunately, it isn't just the private sector, but the academic sector is just as contributing to those myths when data cannot be reproduced, or you end up creating celebrities. And we have a challenge because we get approached all the time saying, well, I just watched this YouTube, or I just heard this podcast. Therefore, this is what I need to do. And here's the latest cocktail. And by the way, so-and-so is doing it to themselves. And so now fund us, or now support us. And that requires this field to come up and figure out how to separate credible progress from that noise. And I think, longevity, this has been not a centuries, but a millennium old, the elixir of youth that we've been having to fight. The other thing is a lot of discussion around, is this something for the uber wealthy? This is something that a few billionaires suddenly got together and said, I want to live forever, therefore. And that's been making headlines. If you look at the front page of different publications, that's what you see. You'll see so-and-so billionaire's face. And yet, everybody on this call, our primary mission is to democratize everything we do for the benefit of all, which is in our statement. And how do we get that? So there's several things, but I hope that covers a couple of the areas that we find disproportionate attention.
Thank you, Mehmood. Again, I'll second that in terms of at AFAR, we face that same challenge, and we'd like to think that we could become, the good housekeeping seal of approval of what works and what, but no one's going to do that. But it is a never-ending battle of separating the wheat from the chaff, and the noise is very loud. So I think that is a great point. Jamie, XPRIZE is a little bit different, and I know, the metaphor, of course, that we've used is you're building the plane as you're flying it.
Yeah.
So it's a really evolving process. So, when you got a few seconds to think about this, you get a million questions. I mean, that's almost what you do, is
Yeah.
you're always taking questions from the field and adapting the XPRIZE. Are there really big ones that keep coming up that you would be able like to say, look, here's something, the answer is no, or we don't do this, or we're not going to do that?
Right. No, so I think this is I could just echo everything that Mehmood already said, is that our biggest ones that come out. And aside from is this only pertain to the rich? Because that is a big one. That is a huge question that it gets asked frequently. But the biggest one is around the metrics. And again, not the metrics in per se as, oh, you should test this, you should measure that, which there, of course, are those discussions among scientists. But the bigger one is, as was already said, is how often I have people come to me with this idea and say, I've already tested it, it works. And, and they'll look at our metrics. Oh, you just need 10 to 20 years improvement in these equivalent metrics, right? We set these thresholds for muscle, cognitive, and immune function. I already have it. It's already done. And I think that there's this huge misconception in the field that this is somehow easy. And so I think that's both from many times our basic scientists who might be able to see something in a mouse or play with some of the data, and they maybe don't have the sophistication of having gone into trials and see just how challenging it is to change function, not just change, but improve function in middle-aged and older adults with an actual intervention, is that this is in no way trivial, in no way easy. And so I'd say that's a question I field on at least a weekly basis. But it doesn't bother me answering it, is that I think exactly what it signals is what's already been said, is that, that we do need verifiable goalposts within the field, is that there's an awful lot of snake oil out there. And I think it's really damaging to the field. And so having groups come together and develop sort of a standard proof, because there is the burden of proof is always on the investigator, the scientist, or the clinician to show what you're doing works. And that we just have to provide a few frameworks around what that is and what it looks like. And, this is not going to be something, another question, it's like, oh, well, the FDA will give you this, or your regulator will give you this. And that's actually not how it works at all. Is that it's the scientists that actually have to come together, have to collaborate, and have to find some agreement around what those metrics may be. And then we can start that conversation and move it forward. And so again, one is that this is going to be easy. It's not. Two is that, is this only really, super expensive therapeutics? No. Is this something, the other one I get all the time, can't people just exercise? That would be great, but no, that's not going to be enough, and so it really is beginning a conversation about how we test this in early stage and how that might lead to really thoughtful conversations about what could change for regulators. I'm going to add my second most popular question really quickly, is it's because our model's different as opposed to what other groups here are talking about, is that we're a prize model. And so when people see our prize money of $101 million, as I field probably at least weekly, someone on my team fields a question with somebody who's looking for grant money. And we don't do that. And so this is the alternative model where we're using the prize purse to define those goalposts that I talked about before. And that we put the money out there to get people to move in a particular direction. That's not just the teams or the investigators to go after those goalposts. It also helps our funders, our granting agencies, and investors, is that these are the areas that we're looking for people to fund. We don't fund the teams. The teams have to bring in their own investments. They have to bring in their own grant funding. They have to bring in their own work going into this pipeline. We're just setting the frameworks and giving them a very shiny object to chase after. And it's huge. And that's how we drive change within particular areas. And that prize model works, is that teams typically have to bring in and put in up to 10 times more than the prize amount in order to get there. So it's a way to incentivize funding, it's a way to incentivize grants, and it's a way to incentivize investments within particular track lanes. And in this case, therapeutic development and accelerating those into clinical trials that are, again, meaningful trials that can be weighed and judged on level, as opposed to everybody going after their own endpoint. And then we don't get much at the end of that. So again, it's forcing networks to build around the world. But again, we can't do it without partnerships of funders and investors in the space. And so it is, I would say that's one of the most critical pieces.
Thank you, Jamie. I think that's very insightful. And again, I think that's a key point to bring up about the scope of the panel. There are different ways to move the field forward. There's funding, there's private companies, there are prizes, and there may be others that are out there, ways to think about what motivates, what incentivizes, and what provides opportunities. And XPRIZE certainly is unique in that way. Thank you. So Richard, NIA is different, of course, and you probably have a million questions that keep coming up for your whole career. So I leave this to you to answer in whatever way you feel is most helpful to the audience. But yeah, are there myths to dispel or misconceptions of NIA that you find every new investigator makes when they get in touch with you that you wish you could spread far and wide?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Tom. So most broadly, if there's a message to convey, it's that we, as a funding agency, and I think this probably applies to all of us, are in partnership with the whole of the research community. And at times, this is different from what is viewed as an adversarial relationship. Like, we dare you to send in an application, and we're going to do all we can to reject it. We live, and I speak for myself, for all of our staff, and probably for everyone on this call as well, we live to promote and support the very best ideas from people in the field, from people outside the field, to recruit new wisdom. It's what we must do to advance. And so if there's, again, a single message, is to invite people to contact me, any of us, and to not think there isn't a place for their own research. From the very beginning of pilot through translational research, in the infrastructure which we mentioned, I would like to also touch on this question of globalization. Now, the NIA, and probably true for most of the governmentally funded institutions in particular, have a challenge in funding things across nations and across boundaries. And we're always looking for ways to minimize this impact. The democratization and sharing of data is one way. So wherever the data are generated, wherever biospecimens are generated, they're generally open to sharing with most everyone. And then there are actual efforts that are working to globalize some of our efforts. To mention just one, the health and retirement study is an NIA-funded study of some 30,000 or so Americans over age 50, looking at biology, at financial, economics, multiple parameters. Recently, cognitive outcomes have been important there. This has been expanded now through collaboration across nations with more than 40 national efforts that encompass the majority of the world's population on all continents. And it's an example of harmonizing from the outset the planning of research, even if the dollars aren't crossing boundaries, to accomplish nonetheless a democratization and globalization of the data, the research availabilities. So yeah, for us, there's really very little in the way of research that's out of bounds. It depends upon what comes in and its merits as judged by peer review. And peer review, again, is all of us in the research community, organized, focused by efforts of NIA, but in partnership is probably the best way to categorize, to describe the relationship between the institution and the research community.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Again, I think that's a very nice overview of what NIA wants to accomplish and is able to accomplish and has accomplished. Let me move on to a second question. This is one I was, again, thinking about last night that might be of general interest. So, and this comes from my own experience. So back in the early 2000s, we were doing research in the lab, and I thought there was a real therapeutic dividend to this research. And so I tried to talk to investors, I tried to talk to companies, and no one would listen. And I was, politely laughed out of the room many times saying, there will never be a company on aging. And that was the mindset. Clearly, something has changed in the last 20, 25 years. I would love to hear your reflections on what has driven that. And so both what has driven it and what do you see now as potentially we'll look back on and say, what was happening in the early 2020s that now we're in the 2030s? That was the thing to look at. That was what was really kind of, taking an early stage at that point. And I see that as kind of an inflection for the next, 10 or 20 years. So a little bit of looking back and a little bit of looking forward, whatever you have the most interest in discussing, I'd love to hear, and I'm sure the audience would too. Mehmood, can we start with you? I mean, Hevolution is clearly looking at trends, and what is it you see that made Hevolution come to life now and will be kind of game changing for the years ahead?
I think if I was to thank you, if I was to sum that up, I would probably say there's been a convergence of interest from very different stakeholders that have come together. Some of it has been the global demographic change. Everybody on this call understands that suddenly the challenge around demographic change is no longer one of census and ministers of health, but also ministers of finance, ministers of labor, industry, especially if you look around North America, Western Europe, United Kingdom, Japan, China, etc. And so this has become an economic issue, and countries, not just individuals, are looking for a solution. So that's an important part. The second has been the recognition that the science has moved from fringe to mainstream, and again, credit to organizations like NIA and AFAR that really have pushed this. I think the National Academy of Medicine deserves recognition here, and Victor Zhao for creating this global roadmap to try and convene different stakeholders around the table to get this moving. And so I think those are all examples of individual stakeholders almost sort of recognizing that this was part of the puzzle, but not seeing that picture until the pieces came together. And once you do that, I look at this as say, we at Hevolution, one of our jobs is to be a catalyst. We don't do the research, we don't operate, but we convene, we catalyze, and through that, hopefully create collaboration. We really think about this. So as an example, to hand it back to you, if you recall when you came to the Global Healthspan Summit in 2023, we thought we'd get 500 people come. And as you recall, we had to shut down registration at 2,000. We just didn't have the capacity to provide the space for the people who wanted to come, We're now going to be holding in February 2025, the same summit. 90% of the speakers are already identified and confirmed. And we have at least that many more who want to speak, and we're trying to figure out how to give that. And about a third of the registrants are already finished registering. And we're in October. So it tells me that there was interest from everything from the chairman of GSK, senior corporate, to ministers, down to the individual entrepreneur. And that's what's happening in this field. We're finally getting the convening that needs, and all our job at Hevolution was to actually give them the forum. We didn't do any of that, but just created the forum and continue to hopefully create the forum with great minds will have that discussion. And I actually am very optimistic. I think if we go forward 10 years from now, I always look at it this way. If Hevolution ends up being the 10th or 20th largest funder of this space in a decade, we will celebrate. The idea is not to be the largest, but to end up being the smallest, because the field, like breast cancer, oncology, many other fields, suddenly took off. So, the funding that Altos provides, we provide, we look at this and back, and, Hal and I will look at this and so we're such a small part of the puzzle now. That's a great thing.
Great, thank you. Just to pause for a second, we haven't received any questions from the audience. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left, and so I just want to get through the panel with this question. So maybe a 2 to 3 minute answer if you can. So Richard, clearly NIA tries not to be too prescriptive, but you react to trends and you have RFAs so you can initiate trends. What do you think about these inflections that have really made this field come to life in such a short time?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So briefly, I think it's a convergence of the demographic imperative that we've heard, but also with the scientific advances, which have been so extraordinary and pervasive across the field. And only as an example, a few years ago, when initial biomarkers programs were out, they failed. In fact, we stopped using the word biomarkers because it seemed an unrealistic thing to talk about. The fact that we can now relate them to multiple molecular genetic aspects of science that look at the genome interacting with the exposome in a way that makes the science real and creates those opportunities has at the same time the imperative demographically has occurred, has given us the basic science research recognized, I think, by investigators, supported by NIA and all of you, to make the field move forward. I think that was an inflection point.
Great, thank you. And Jamie, XPRIZE is all about trends, obviously. I guess maybe the question I would ask you is why now? Why is this the right time for XPRIZE?
Oh gosh. So I'd say for many reasons. I'm going to give a couple. Personally, I would say I think one of the big changes that is certainly leading to an inflection point is, I consider myself, I'm of a generation where I'm the first of a generation of geroscientists, where, coming through this is that this wasn't an implausible idea. And I think that that's really an important piece for this audience to know in particular, is that, when I was going through getting my first career development awards, is that this was not a crazy fringe thing to do, is that I was trained that there were biologic hallmarks that could be targeted and that these were viable candidates for therapeutic development. And we just needed to figure out how. And so this has been, I think there's something really informative with that, of just having, again, waves of trainees and folks coming through this where it's not fringe. It's not crazy, it's real. And that there's evidence in the proof of concept being built from NIA-funded programs like the Interventions Testing Program. There's more novel therapeutics coming out. There's a lot of movement and activity in the space. There are critical barriers that, need to be legitimized and develop frameworks. But the time's now, because again, it's sometimes it's good to be in the field that's already moving. And so we're sort of riding the crest and the wave of that and beginning to form and shape it in the ways that needs to happen. And again, where does that work happen? It happens through global collaborations. So, certainly my formative experiences were through like a translational geroscience network where I was at the table developing papers, working on things, whether they're NIH funded, AFAR supported, and now with Hevolution, is that I think it really takes a lot of voices and a lot of people coming together. And then some really energized and incentivized groups. And, I have to really look at Altos for this, is that, looking at this space, seeing real novel therapeutics that could fundamentally change the way we see our, aging from a cellular all the way up to an organismal level. I mean, these are, again, all points that we look at that just say, okay, this is a real field, this is legitimized, this is moving forward. And we're just at an inflection point of deciding how and shaping what that looks like for the good of the field.
Great, thank you, Jamie. And Hal, I guess you'll get the last word here. So, Altos obviously is betting on trends too. And you've seen the field from, your time at Calico to time now. So you've seen this kind of incredible transition. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm usually very conservative in my comments. In fact, I think some of the things that have set the aging field back a little bit has been the hyperbole, as somebody said, snake oil. But when I look at the science that's emerging from all of this work, and I look at all of the advanced technologies, excuse me, that are being developed, almost by the quarter, you will see something new that's transformative in the technology space. And when I look at the advances that are being made in generative AI, advanced machine learning, there's no doubt in my mind that this field is going to have the biggest impact on science and medicine of anything I think I've ever seen. The question, I think, is how long it's going to take and whether we're going to have enough funding to wear the storms that we will find ourselves in at some time. But the ability to improve Healthspan by even 3 to 4 years is profound. I think more work just convincing the world, regulators, economists, on the enormous impact that will have should generate a lot more funding than even exists today. People often say, how can there be this billions of dollars being given to fund these aging companies? But the truth is, how can it not be 10 times that? When you think of the impact this is going to have, there's very few things that I've seen in my 35 years of doing this that, when successful, will have the impact. And maybe just the glimmer of hope that the GLP-1s are showing, that they may not be classic aging drugs, but the impact that you can have when your therapeutic reverses some of the most important age-related pathologies, the impact that has on science, medicine, and this is a small example of what I think we're all working on. So when I look at everything, I'm not sure how long it's going to take. That may be the question mark, but there's going to be some bumps. But this field will change medicine and science, and in a very profound way. I'm confident
Well, thank you for ending on that upbeat, positive, and optimistic note, but it will take time for sure. Okay, so we're at the hour, so I just wanted to really thank this panel for a really enlivened and wonderful and insightful discussion. I want to thank the audience also for joining, and I hope it was helpful to you as it was to me. And thank obviously Victor and the National Academy of Medicine for convening this and the 2-day session they're having, and for the grand challenge. I mean, again, it's another piece of the puzzle that's really advancing the field and promoting aging research globally. So thank you all. I'll turn this back over to the organizers.